Welcome to the Sugar-Free Kids Summit, where we bring you the world's top educators, MDs, PhDs, childhood development experts, and pediatric nutritionists to give you the leading science and new information in regards to sugar's devastating effects on our children. Now remember, we'll be bringing you 6 to 8 hours of video presentations every single day, so make sure you set a reminder for yourself, or just look out for the email from us each morning. If you have a full-time job and you're not able to watch each day's presentations, I recommend grabbing yourself an all-access pass where you'll get instant lifetime access to all the video recordings, audio recordings, and thousands of dollars in free bonuses from our 40-plus guest speakers. But without further ado, let's get into today's presentations. Hey everybody, Mike back with a special edition talking about sugar and kids. I'm super excited. I've seen these three lovely women together on a group discussion and it was electric. So I'm really excited to bring these health warriors to you guys. And we're going to talk about sugar, and we're going to have a few other things about the health of our children. Let me just grab their bios real quick, and then I'm going to let them tell their stories individually. But we have, let me start this on the way that it's paginating on the screen. We have Zen Honeycutt is the author of Unstoppable, Transforming Sickness and Struggle into Triumph, Empowerment, and Celebration of Community. I absolutely love that tagline. And she's got a great story of her son and how she became the founder and executive director of Moms Across America. So that should be interesting to all of you. Then down on the left below her is Dr. Michelle Perro. I hope I'm pronouncing that. She's an MD, a veteran pediatrician with 4 decades of experience in acute and integrative medicine. And more than 15 years ago, Dr. Perro transformed her clinical practice to include GMO and pesticide advocacy. And it goes on. She's got a lot of experience, her own business, Down to Earth Pediatrics, and then an acclaimed book, What's Making Our Children Sick. So everyone seems to be falling right in line with getting your kids healthy. On the far below that is Stephanie Senoff, a doctor, I believe. She's a researcher at MIT, gang, Computer Science Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. But in recent years, she's been focusing her interest back towards biology and concentrates mainly on the relationship between nutrition and health. Again, editor or published over 30 papers with her colleagues, peer-reviewed medical and health-related journals about modern-day diseases and such. So gang, we are in good company to get your kids healthy. So we're going to start right up on the left with Zen. Love that name. Up on the left-hand side, she's going to tell you a little bit about herself and her story, how she ended up as the founder of Moms Across America. And then we'll go around and we're going to have a fun discussion after that. Everybody's going to introduce themselves. Zen, how are you?
Great. Thank you, Mike. And thank you for all the viewers that are watching right now, the Sugar-Free Summit. I'm so excited. It's a daunting task to have your kid go sugar-free. I will say that it was very daunting for me and my son. And this was many years ago now. My oldest is 20, my middle is 18, and my youngest is 14. But when my middle child was 8 years old, he had a sudden onset of autism symptoms, kicking and screaming and trying to hit his father and myself. And I could see this look in his eyes that he did not want to do that. He was basically crying out for help, and he hated himself for how he was being, and he needed help. And even though my husband said, oh, it's just a phase, I said, no, there's something else going on here, and took him to a doctor. And we happened to have an autism doctor because at the time they were spacing out the vaccine schedule, right? And I wanted that. I wanted them spaced out. So we went to that particular doctor, not because my children had autism, but because of the way that he was able to work with the patients. And what I learned from him is that his behavior, the kicking and the screaming, and his grades had dropped from A's down to D's and F's in math, his favorite subjects. He wasn't doing his schoolwork. His teacher called me. He said, there's really a problem going on here. And he said, he tested his urine. He said he has gut dysbiosis. He has C. diff. He's got bad bacteria. He's got all these different fungus and mold and bacteria and all these things in his gut. And he said he has gut dysbiosis. And the problem is that most children in America now have this leaky gut issue and this high levels of bacteria in the gut. Your kids are just lucky that they happen to have a mom who's finding this out about them, right? And I was like, that's not good. That it's good for my kids, but what about every other kid out there?
Right.
And I said, so exactly what is going on with him? And he said, the bad bacteria in his gut, it's contributing to inflammation in his brain. And a light bulb went off for me because I had learned about glyphosate in the food supply, and which is also sprayed on sugar, by the way. And I learned that it can destroy the beneficial bacteria in the gut. And I'm sure Dr. Seneff will talk more about this, and Dr. Pero as well, and contribute to the overgrowth of pathogenic gut bacteria, which then the lipopolysaccharides on the outer walls of the pathogenic gut bacteria, according to Dr. Matt Buckley, signal the vagus nerve to tell the brain, the microglia cells in the brain, to go on attack. And they create excitotoxins, which go on attack and can excite and then deplete and kill the brain neurons, right? Or tire them out. So then there's a lack of connection and the kids are no longer making eye contact or doing whatever erratic behavior, not able to focus and learn, brain fog, all that stuff. And so he said, what's happening is the bad bacteria in your son's gut is contributing to this brain inflammation and autism-like symptoms. And I said, wait a second, that's what glyphosate does. The whole process that I just explained, and he had not heard of that. So we had to talk for maybe like 45 minutes. He said I should speak at the MAPS, the doctor's events. I said, well, I'm not a doctor, but you can look into it and you can learn from people like Stephanie Seneff and Michelle Pero and all these other people that are talking about it. And so he said, well, I think it's a good idea to go glyphosate free, not just gluten-free and dairy-free, but also sugar-free, because the sugar feeds the bad bacteria in the gut. And if you don't do all of those things, if you keep putting in the glyphosate sprayed food, which is wheat and peas and beans and oats and things like that, if they're not organic, they can be sprayed with glyphosate as a drying agent. If you keep putting those in, you're going to be killing off the bad bacteria. If you keep putting in the sugar, you're going to keep feeding the bad bacteria. If you're going to put in dairy, it's also more bad bacteria, that kind of thing, especially conventional dairy. So we cut out all of those things, and it happened to be between Thanksgiving and New Year. So even Christmas had to be sugar-free, and Santa Claus had to get very creative about that. But he did it, and he was about 8.5 years old. He went sugar-free and organic for 6 weeks. It was even longer, but after 6 weeks, we retested him. Oh, I forgot to tell you, in the beginning, we tested him. He had 8.7 parts per billion of glyphosate in his urine. He was the only one of my sons that had that. The other two were gluten-free. So they weren't eating glyphosate sprayed gluten, and they did not have those levels of glyphosate in their bodies. He did. So he had 8.7 parts per billion of glyphosate when he began. 6 weeks later, we retested him. His glyphosate levels were no longer detectable, and his autism symptoms were gone. He had also gone sugar-free, and he had treated his gut with colloidal silver. And he unfortunately did do some antibiotics and antifungals, but we also did a lot of beneficial things like probiotics and sauerkraut and colloidal silver and MSM by MRM and things like that, but also sugar-free. And so when he was able to recover his autism symptoms in 6 weeks, and they only came back when he ate sugary, conventional foods.
Whoa.
Yeah. That's when the only time the symptoms came back. And it wasn't for years later when he worked at a bakery when he was 16, and he called them the depression cookies because those symptoms came back for a little while. So that's why I started Moms Across America, because I had kids with health issues, and I learned about GMOs and glyphosate, and I learned about the food supply. And I've learned since then that thousands of other parents have recovered their children from autism symptoms and many other health issues by eating organic. And I want to add in there, avoiding sugar and many other toxins in the environment.
Nice. That is just an incredible story. Thank you. We've seen so much, like, this is just great. Thank you so much. And congratulations for sticking up for the young man. That's awesome.
He did it too. He had the willpower to do that. It was,
yeah.
It was.
Well, I'm going to come back. I'm going to circle back because I know it wasn't easy. Believe me, I've done it. We've interviewed a lot of people that have done it. And it wasn't easy for the poor guy and for your family. So we'll come back to that. Okay. Michelle, tell us what's up over at your neck of the woods there.
Yeah, let me share my Zoom box here. As you may not know, I'm a pediatric emergency physician by training, and I worked in academic centers doing pediatric emergency medicine for a long time. When my own son was born, he had some health challenges, which I later learned were from hepatitis B vaccine. But 30 years ago, I didn't know that. But I was always uncomfortable with a lot of this stuff. I'm crunchy by nature. And I had this serendipitous encounter with a homeopath who I happened to run into yesterday at a health expo. I haven't seen her in a long time. And she flipped my world around when she told me to give my son a remedy, a homeopathic remedy. Never heard of it. I'm from New York, the land of chocolate and dinosaurs. Gave him this remedy, and boom, my son's health issue was better. And it took me twice. And I said, I was just pissed off, Mike, because I said, what do you mean? There are these sugar pills that will reverse an illness. I'm an ER doc. Are you kidding me? So I said, I have to study this stuff. My kids were small. I was working. I actually had my own practice, and I went back to school and I learned homeopathy, the field of medicine that rolls more doctors' eyes than any other field, in my opinion. Took the brunt of endless jokes, criticisms, belittling. It was intense how negative people felt about homeopathy, but the miracles happened homeopathically every day. And now this, what does that have to do with sugar? Because often the medicine is in little sugar pills, by the way, but it's just a little bit of sugar that you get with your remedy. And I can avoid sugar and put them in other liquids, by the way, FYI, but it's just a small amount. So son gets better, and then I'm working along with miracles with homeopathy. One of the moms in the practice said, Michelle, we need help stopping the spraying in Northern California against the light brown apple moth. I was so busy, PTA chair, soccer mom, all that nonsense. I had a hard time saying no. And I helped these moms. We stopped the spray. And one of those moms handed me Jeffrey Smith's book and said, what do you think about GMOs? And I didn't know anything about GMOs. It's about 2003. And
Right.
so that's how long I've been at it, 20 years ago. Read the book, and my world flipped again, yet again, more light bulbs popping off, because I recognized at that time I started seeing an uptick in autism. And about 90% of kids on the spectrum, which is now in California, 1 in 20 kids, by the way, in California, 1 in 30 in the US. We can go there too, because they all have problems with sugar, as well as other things, and as Zen pointed out. And then once I understood about GMOs and their associated pesticides, glyphosate-based herbicides, I began going down that route. And a group of moms, we decided in 2014 to start GMO Science. We worked on initiatives to try and label. We failed because of the Grocery Manufacturers Association that poured millions of dollars to stop our labeling efforts at the time. We started GMO Science, which is an organization, a nonprofit, which hosts the new MDs, which we can talk about, just talking about GMOs, pesticides, and those effects with a lens on health. So this is where I've been. But since that time, I wrote the book, What's Making Our Children Sick, because I could only see 10 kids in the clinic in a day. Bad day would be 15, because all these kids had chronic, complex diseases. And I started to learn and train myself how to become literally a naturopathic doctor. And that's what I did. So I had to increase my ability to treat with herbs, Ayurvedic, homeopathic, hands-on, manipulatives, you name it. I learned it and started treating kids with complex diseases and autism, reversing autism pretty regularly. And I wrote about it, a lot of my patients. So said, oh my God, I need to write the book because we have to get the word out. Sound the alarms. We got problems. Then I increased my vision to more about environmental toxicants, because I realized kids were under attack from, you name it, air, food, water, EMFs, untested medical therapies, environmental waste, Hollywood, internet, TikTok is my favorite. And so I wrote an Environmental Health Children's Bill of Rights, which is what I've been talking about. But the best news yet is that there are many things, but these beautiful gals and myself, we've created the new MDs, mothers, doctors, and scientists. We've started a podcast, and that's where we link with you. Sugar-Free Kid Summit, really educating parents, eaters, consumers, for lay people, from the mom, from the scientist, from me, I'm the doc, about the dangers and harms from the chronic poisoning that's affecting our children's health. We, as listeners, attendees, Sugar-Free Man, all of us together have to shift the tide yesterday. Well, we'll do it now. We can't go back in time. Well, maybe we can. Maybe some people out there can. We're going to shift the tide and regain our children's health, one organic bite at a time. And that's what we're here to do.
Love that message. Thank you. That was great. Stephanie, you're up.
Okay, my name is Stephanie Seneff. I'm a senior research scientist at MIT. I spent most of my career writing code to develop computer skills to communicate with humans using natural speech. So precursors to Amazon Echo and the Siri iPhone Siri. And also, of course, those nasty phone calls when you get the computer and have to talk to it instead of talking to a human. Unfortunately, that comes out of our technology. But along about 2006, 2007 timeframe, I was watching the autism rates go up, just as Michelle was. And I was saying, this is not right. They just said, we're just diagnosing it more. Don't worry about it. I didn't believe that. I thought something in the environment is causing this. I want to figure out what it is. So I have skills in statistical analysis, looking at trends, correlations. And I started to look for what could it be in the environment that is going up over time, exactly in step with this continued rise in autism. What could it be? And I actually looked for 5 years before I came upon glyphosate. I didn't consider glyphosate. It's safe, right? It's supposed to be perfectly safe for humans. I happened to be at a conference in 2012 when Professor Don Huber is a retired over 80 years old, had a long career as a professor in plant pathology and plant physiology, and was aware, one of the few people at that time who was aware that glyphosate is much more toxic than they're claiming. And he gave an amazing talk, and I was on the edge of my seat because he was explaining all these ways in which glyphosate disrupts your health, starting with the gut microbes, having the mineral problems, binding to the minerals, disabling enzymes, critical enzymes in the liver that detoxify other toxic chemicals. So he was going about all these problems and about the gut-brain axis and how it affects what happens in the gut affects the brain. And I was like, this is it. I really had an epiphany during that presentation and went back and dropped everything else I was looking for and started looking at glyphosate. And I did a lot of correlation studies with other researchers. We published papers showing exact correlations, incredibly good match between the rise in glyphosate usage on core crops and the rise in a whole bunch of diseases, one of which is autism. Autism matches almost perfectly. Autism rates in first grade compared to glyphosate usage on corn and soy crops over the preceding 4 years. So basically an estimate of the child's potential exposure to glyphosate through the food. And glyphosate is all over the food supply. The government doesn't bother to test for it because they consider it to be safe. They know it's there. They don't care. Now, people like Zen Honeycutt are testing and finding alarming amounts in foods that are popular with the kids, like Oreo cookies and goldfish crackers. And of course, all these legumes, the legumes have extremely high levels. People don't realize that's the chickpeas and the garbanzo beans, the hummus. People think those are healthy substitutes for a gluten-free diet, loaded with glyphosate, even more glyphosate than almost any other food, including the GMO crops. So those foods are not GMO, but they're sprayed right before the harvest. That's a good time to get the glyphosate into the seed, and it ends up in very high amounts in the foods. And that's also true for wheat. And of course, we have this epidemic in celiac disease, gluten intolerance, and also casein intolerance in the milk. These are foods that are contaminated with glyphosate. And I've written papers showing how glyphosate disrupts the gut microbiome to cause these diseases like celiac disease, and also inflammatory gut, inflammation of the gut due to pathogen overgrowth. All of these things are going up exactly in step with the rise in glyphosate usage on core crops. So I have come to believe that glyphosate is the most important factor, not the only thing that causes autism, but the most important factor in the autism epidemic. And I believe glyphosate is disrupting the way the gut microbes handle sugar in particular. And many things get disrupted, but sugar gets disrupted. The way the gut microbes are able to handle sugar gets disabled by the glyphosate. And as a consequence, the sugar ends up being stored as fat. It gets converted to fat and stored in the abdominal cavity. You get this sort of abdominal obesity. Or if you stay thin, it goes over to the liver. And this is particularly fructose. It's really interesting, the metabolism of fructose, and I can go into more later, but the fructose ends up going to the liver because the gut microbes did not metabolize it. And in metabolizing it, they would have produced short chain fatty acids, which are very essential for the health of a colon. The butyrate, for example, is the colonocyte's favorite food is butyrate. And the gut microbes that make the butyrate get disrupted by the glyphosate. So this is really a perfect storm. The sugar ends up being much more toxic than it would otherwise be, I believe, because of the chronic exposure to glyphosate. And the glyphosate is in all the sugar-containing foods because the sugar beets are GMO Roundup Ready crops. The sugar cane is sprayed with glyphosate right before the harvest. And then you have the high fructose corn syrup, which comes from corn, and corn is a GMO Roundup Ready crop. Even the honey, when you look at, there was a paper on honey, and it showed that they looked at honeys all around Mexico, US, Canada, other places. the honeys from the US were loaded with glyphosate compared to the other countries. It really stood out. And even the organic honeys can test positive. You can't really keep the bees away from the plants that have the glyphosate on them. You can't control your bees that well. And so it's very difficult to keep the glyphosate away from the food. It's impossible at this point in our country. We use more glyphosate per person than any other country. And glyphosate is the most common herbicide on the planet. And it's supposed to be very safe, which is why it's so dangerous, because it's insidiously, cumulatively toxic. And I have my book here, Toxic Legacy, How the Weed Killer Glyphosate is Destroying Our Health and the Environment. And so this book was a culmination of more than 10 years of effort, reading about glyphosate, writing about glyphosate in papers, and finally getting up the energy to write the book in 2021. And it was chosen as one of the top 100 books, nonfiction books of that year, Chelsea Green Publishers. And
Nice. Unbelievable.
Mike, can I add into
Yeah,
what Stephanie
please.
said about, so this GMO corn that's genetically engineered to withstand Roundup, 80% of GMOs are engineered to withstand Roundup. And corn turns into sugar in the body. It's a sugar creating fructose. I'm not a scientist, but
High fructose corn syrup.
yeah, high fructose corn
high
syrup. But
fructose corn syrup.
corn by itself, corn ingredients are in practically everything we eat, packaged foods. It's in GMOs are in 75% of processed foods. So that means some form of either GMO corn or soy or sugar beets is in 75% of Americans' processed foods. And the corn and the soy, at least, I don't know about the corn and the sugar, definitely turn into fructose in the body and impact the insulin levels and all of that. I'm not sure about the soy. Maybe you ladies have something more to say about that, but I just want people to be aware of the prevalence of these GMO products that are sprayed with glyphosate that are fructose creating. They turn into fructose. Even potatoes, right, turn into sugar. The starches and it can turn into sugars. And there's GMO potatoes out there, right? So there are many different things that people need to be aware of in the food supply that don't just say sugar on them. Ingredients is something else, but it can turn into sugars. So that's important to know.
And I should say high fructose corn syrup is a product that they produce from the corn, from the GMO Roundup Ready corn. And it has, of course, high fructose. It has more fructose than sucrose, than the normal sugar that we're familiar with,
And
like
so let
cane
me
sugar.
I got to jump in here because Dr. Renee Dufault, who worked for the USDA as a whistleblower, revealed how the high fructose corn syrup, they use mercury as a solvent to extract the materials from this high fructose corn syrup. And there's mercury in the high fructose corn syrup. And so kids are getting extra dose of heavy metals, and mercury is a toxicant for children, not a health food. But additionally, mercury, there are papers out as early as 1993 which show how mercury kills off the microbiome. So again, we know glyphosate's an antibiotic. We have heavy metals from the high fructose corn syrup extraction process, and Dr. Dufault wrote a book about that. And additionally, as if that's not enough of a microbiome thing, we have experimental therapies, which we now know, like the mRNA immunomodulating therapies that kids are getting injected with, also kill up the microbiome. So what we have is the death of the microbiome, and that's a problem. And there's also heavy metals in the Roundup, showed by Dr. Seralini in a paper he wrote. They're contaminated with arsenic, lead, cadmium, mercury. So we have this global assault on our children's guts. And what's the result? They all have leaky gut and dysbiosis, which affects their brain. And so they can't, not only can they not eat sugar, they can't eat a lot of other things. So we have a health disaster. It's not coming, it's here.
I'm so interested in this. I've been doing like over 400 interviews on the original Quit Sugar Summit before we did the kids one. And what I've found is that for 10 years, so it's only 10 to 12 or 15 years that they've been studying fructose, that the offending molecule is the fructose. So I'm very interested in this combination of glyphosate, GMOs. What we've focused on, people always get me on the fruit, right? And when I tell them that the fruit they're eating today is nothing compared, it's hybridized giant sugar bombs, fructose bombs. They had nothing to do with the little berries or little crab apples that they were 300 years ago. Forget about bananas, you couldn't even eat them 300 years ago. And so this fructose information, what I've found is fructose opens up little holes next to the villi where they're trying to get the nutrition, and it's leaking into the gut. So very interested in all of the connections of anything that's going along with that fructose that's making it worse. So this is a very germane topic for our listeners. So maybe we start back with Stephanie on that connection you were talking about with the fructose.
Yes, it's actually quite amazing. And I think it's quite central to the story. And I think it's also a major reason why sugar is so toxic. And I think sugar did not used to be so toxic as it is today. And that's
Oh.
because we didn't have all those environmental chemicals that are messing up the gut microbes. So
Right.
it's very interesting. And I wrote about it in my book. I have a whole chapter on the gut in my book, and I worked really hard on that chapter. That was a tough chapter to write. It was a lot of studying to figure out exactly what's going on. But in
Yeah.
the end, I was quite fascinated with what I found, which is a critical thing, is that glyphosate, first of all, glyphosate disrupts enzymes, it disrupts the bacteria. The lactobacillus, and there are two key classes of bacteria that are really important in the infant gut. And they're very susceptible to glyphosate. So they get harmed by the glyphosate and they reduce in numbers, which allows the pathogens to overgrow. And that's how you get the inflammation in the gut, the immune cells get involved. It's a mess. And then you start to get leaky gut and all those problems. But more than that, the lactobacillus help the host in digesting proteins that contain proline and gluten and casein. Casein is the milk, gluten is the wheat. Those are proteins that contain a lot of proline. And so when your bacteria are harmed, the baby is unable to digest those proteins easily. They stick around as long as peptides, often short peptides, stuck at the proline. Proline is an amino acid, and it's a tricky one to get. It needs special treatment. The normal enzymes don't work for it. But the lactobacillus have several enzymes that they produce for the host to help to digest those proteins. So those proteins end up as peptides that are allergenic. Those are foreign peptides that get past that leaky gut, get into the circulation, immune cells get upset, and you get autoimmune disease because of similarities. There's something called molecular mimicry, where the human protein is similar to the piece of the peptide that didn't get digested. And then your body starts attacking things like the thyroid, or you get sclerosis. And I think that's playing a role in autism as well. So that's one path. The proteins are not getting digested. So what's happening then, the proteins are supposed to get broken down into amino acids and then absorbed in the upper gut. But that doesn't happen, and that doesn't happen well because of the glyphosate. So the proteins make their way into the colon. And that's a big problem, because at that point, you can't absorb the amino acids anymore. But there are other microbes that can break those proteins down into amino acids and further break them down, all the way down to basic carbon dioxide and nitrogen. So you free up the nitrogen that's in the amino acids, and that and you make ammonia, and that raises the pH of the gut. And that is a huge problem, because when the pH of the gut, that's the acid-base balance, when it's too high, the microbes that convert fructose to fat go away. They can't live in that basic environment. And as a consequence, the fructose that you're eating doesn't get converted to short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, acetate, and propionate. And those short-chain fatty acids that are normally produced by the microbes, not just from fructose, but also from roughage and things like that, undigested carbohydrates, they make those short-chain fatty acids. The colonocytes that line the gut love that. That's their favorite fuel, butyrate. When they don't get enough butyrate, they get sick. So they're suffering because they're not getting enough butyrate. Meanwhile, the fructose is not being cleared. And that's a serious problem, because fructose I've heard it's 10 times as bad as glucose as a glycating agent. And when you get sugar in the blood, you get prediabetes. The sugar attacks the proteins, attacks the hemoglobin. Hemoglobin A1C is something you measure to see if you've got a problem with diabetes, high blood sugar. The fructose is supposed to get cleared by the gut microbes. It shouldn't even show up in the circulation at all. But what happens is it doesn't. So either you can build an abdominal obesity, and those fat cells in your gut can take up the fructose and turn it into fat and store it. So that's one thing that happens. People get chubby. But another thing is, if you're going to make sure to stay thin by starving yourself, then the fructose is going to make its way to the liver. Right. You can get fatty liver disease even though you're very thin. It's not just being obese that causes fatty liver disease. And that's because the fructose is going to the liver, and the liver wants to grab it out, because the liver is trying to make sure that everything bad gets out of the blood before it goes into the general circulation. Right. And so the liver takes up the fructose, converts it into fat, and then stores it. That's fatty liver disease. Or it can package it up inside LDL particles and ship them out. That's going to raise your levels of lipids, the LDL, which is going to put you on a statin drug, right? Because you have high serum LDL. You have that because you had fructose that couldn't be managed by the gut microbes. It ends up at the liver. The liver turns it into fat and ships that fat out along with cholesterol in these lipid particles, raises your LDL. And in fact, I did a study on hospital discharge data, and I found that they have symptoms at discharge. And they had one of the symptoms was high serum cholesterol or high lipid particles. And that was highly correlated with the rising. It was rising over time in step with a rise in glyphosate usage on core crops. It's another one of those factors that correlated with glyphosate.
Okay,
I
so
think the high LDL is caused by the
simplifying this, you are saying that what I've always known and had come to believe about fructose and its damage and all the things that it causes mentally and physically. Just a study came out recently that Perlmutter and Bresden and Dr. Richard Johnson, who I love, who talks about fructose all the time, is saying that it may cause Alzheimer's, okay? But what you're saying is that the GMOs and the glyphosate are actually making the fructose reaction in the body worse.
much, much worse. It's disrupting the normal mechanisms by which fructose is managed. Fructose should be a healthy food. People, we're related monkeys, right? And monkeys live on fruit. How could we not be able to handle fruit? Fruit has lots of fructose. Doesn't make sense that fruit would be toxic. It doesn't make sense. But when you take into consideration the poisons, and particularly glyphosate and the disruption of the gut microbiome, we are realizing now, the number of papers on the gut microbiome has skyrocketed in the last 10 years, as people are realizing more and more how much they matter. That they didn't notice that the gut microbes mattered back in the day because there wasn't a problem with them. They were working fine. We didn't realize how much they were doing for us because they were doing it so well. We didn't see a problem. Now we do.
And can I add in?
Yeah, let's
that-
check in with the other. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add in that glyphosate doesn't just increase the impact of sugar, it increases the harmful impact of all environmental toxins, according to Stephanie Seneff in her paper with Anthony Samsel. So the aluminum that's in products, the lead, the heavy metals, which unfortunately there's heavy metals in organic baby food, things like that. We can't just say that all organic is perfect because there's just the regulatory agencies have not been doing their jobs and maintaining what's going on in the food supply. So we highly encourage people to grow their own food as much as possible. And if you are going to make, for instance, say baby food, don't put spices in it. Don't put cinnamon in it. We're finding heavy metals and spices. And don't do the root vegetables as much as possible. Do things more, the things that can be mashed, like the squashes, instead of maybe sweet potatoes, right? Instead of the regular potatoes or root or carrots, maybe doing peas or spinach or something else that can be mashed up for baby food. And those other heavy metals can contribute to a person's erratic behavior, like my son's. So it's not just the sugar, I think, that is contributing to that erratic behavior that parents are seeing in their kids. It's the red food dyes, and it's the heavy metals, and it's the pesticides, and glyphosate, which is found on sugar as well. Cane sugar can be sprayed with glyphosate as a drying agent before harvest, and sugar beets are sprayed because they're genetically engineered to withstand it. And 100% of the sugar beets grown in the United States are GMO, 100% of them. And those GMO sugar beet fields are upstream from places like Flint, Michigan, where the waters in the pipes was filled with heavy metals. That's because glyphosate gets into that water and it's a chelator, grabs onto these heavy metals and drags them into the water. And so our kids are being inundated by toxins, and there's a connection between sugar and these other GMOs. And we need parents to know that it's not just one thing. There's a combination of effects from the sugar in connection with glyphosate and these other heavy metals.
This is like
Toxins.
a magnifying power. I want to come back to the brain in a second, the autism, the ADHD, that kind of stuff. But Michelle, you were going to say something.
I was listening to these explanations by Stephanie. Thank you, and Zen, and your comments. I would also add that what happens with this disruption in the microbiome that Stephanie has elucidated so eloquently, it's important to understand that because your microbes live in harmony. And we keep referring back to the microbiome, all of us. The microbiome is now considered an organ. We're more microbial than we are human. Some of us 10 to 1. And that they all live in balance, homeostasis. When we have this change in the pH that Stephanie was talking about, that allows for some pathogens or just some organisms to become unchecked. Which ones? Fungi. So before 25 years ago, children did not have a problem with mycotoxin illness, mold, fungal overgrowth. Those were unheard of. Now, children have overgrowth of mold. Those mycotoxins can be really hard to get rid of. You can make you very ill. And a lot of it has to do with the fact of this fructose in the gut, which has been converted, not being converted, and be producing more lipids, which get shuttled back to the liver. Your liver has a few enzymes that can break them down, but not that many, causes, in my humble opinion, an overgrowth of fungi, mold, and mycotoxin illness. And yeast is one type of mold. Yeast is a type of it. Everyone has heard of Candida or Candida, candidiasis, and they love to eat sugar. So now you have an overgrowth of these various molds, yeast in your tummy. And what do kids crave? They want sugar. They use sugar for an energy source. Kids start craving what the microbiome wants. Sidebar, what is so important, what we were talking about, is 1 in 3 Americans now has this fatty liver. It's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Kids have it too. You see it incidentally, but you need an ultrasound to find it. What's the problem with it? The liver doesn't work as well. Your liver, among many of its functions, is your major detoxification organ. So now all these other things we're talking about, the liver gets filled with fat, which can then go to other yucky stuff where it becomes inflamed. You get hepatitis from the fat, which can then lead to scarring called fibrosis, cirrhosis, which is end-stage liver issue. We just thought obese children had it, not so fast. There's something called lean non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in children. Even lean children can have this fatty liver. Pediatricians, other health practitioners are not aware. They're not changing children's diets, and we have to get them off these sugars, and also to protect the microbiome, not to mention give them a nutrient-rich diet. So I know this is a complicated understanding for listeners, like what are these people talking about? It's to understand what we eat directly affects our microbes, and our microbes not only are our first line of detoxification, they also produce vitamins like B12, which is a detoxification assistant vitamin, and others like folate. So our kids can't clear all these other toxins and toxicants.
And I want to add in that there can be a very big difference that happens in a few days or weeks. And I've saw that in my child and many people within days or weeks, their sleep improves, their behavior improves, their ability to focus improves. And when you make these changes, which we are advocating is not just sugar-free, but it's organic as well, as much as possible. For many people, dairy-free and gluten-free, it really depends on the child. But when you make those changes, I have to say it needs to be 100%. It cannot be 80-20. It needs to be 100% because the body it holds on to this stuff. And then when you add in a little bit of it, it's like you can't expect a campfire to go out if you're adding a teaspoon of fuel to the fire. You've got to stop putting fuel in the fire altogether. Now, it may not be forever, and you may not agree with me, Mike.
Oh, I agree with you. Believe me. You don't
what if it's just a year? What if it's just a year? What if it's just a couple months, right? Like you talk to your kids about it and you get them on board and agree to it. You start with 2 weeks and you maybe a couple months, and you say it may not be forever, which is true for my kids now. They went GMO-free, organic, gluten-free, like I said, for 6 weeks. And then eventually a little bit of sugar. But my kids now, my oldest one is organic, whole food, plant-based diet. He's not interested in cake or sugar. His palate has changed. Yep. And what he wants for his birthday is a giant bowl of fruit. That's what he wants. And lots of salad and other healthy foods. So the kids, their palate changes, and it does take a little time, but the behavioral and the learning and their other behaviors change in a very fast amount of time. So I would just urge parents to go 100% for several weeks, maybe months, make that commitment, and you will see the difference in their behavior.
Thank you. We agree with that too. We agree. Quick, just as a side question, do you all believe that fructose intolerance, fructose malabsorption is increased by this glyphosate? I'll get that pronunciation one day.
Glyphosate. A lot of people have trouble with it. I absolutely think so. And I will say it's not just the fructose. Glyphosate messes up the digestion of all the major food groups, the carbs, the fats, and the proteins. And I
Okay.
mentioned the proteins already messing up the bacteria that help to break down proteins that contain proline.
Right.
The fats is because it suppresses the enzymes in the liver that make bile acids. It's been shown that it suppresses cytochrome P450 enzymes. That's a big class of enzymes in the liver that have many important roles. One of their roles is to detoxify fat-soluble toxins. So that doesn't happen. Those become more toxic. So you're getting other toxic exposures that become more toxic as a consequence of glyphosate disrupting the cytochrome P450 enzymes in the liver. Those enzymes also produce the bile acids. So the bile acids are not flowing adequately. The bile acids are useful, essential for digesting fats. So the fats aren't getting digested. So they're just getting piled into the abdominal fat, because where are they going to go? And then the sugar is getting converted into fat, either in the liver or in the gut. I mean, in the fat in the gut.
Right.
And then the proteins are getting messed up because of those bacteria not being there to help out with the breaking down of the proline. So all of the different food groups are disrupted by glyphosate. So people have low fat diet, extreme low fat diet, extreme high fat diet. People are trying all these different diets, high protein diet. None of them work. The reason why none of them work is because glyphosate disrupts the metabolism of all of them.
So I love this, man. This is, you guys are bringing another part to my fructose theories, but not theories anymore, mostly science. But mine is, and I call this the compliance question a lot. Sometimes when they try this, it's hard. So we need some nuts and bolts on how to do this, number one. Number two, I wanted to kind of lean more towards the behavioral, mental, and emotional, the brain, the ADHD, the autism, the emotional tantrums. If I'm honest, the sugar addiction in the kids, and how to, like, nuts and bolts. You got clients, they come to you, you got parents, you got moms, you got dads. How do you walk them out? So we can focus on the solution, but can we focus on the solution of the behavior change, and then how that helps all of the things that I mentioned and more that you guys have mentioned, how the sugar and all this stuff, fructose, affects how people think, how they're focusing, how their emotions, all that kind of stuff. Can we lean in that direction and how we walk them out?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one, because what we know is that there's a gut-brain axis, right? And the gut communicates with the brain. The gut is your second brain via the vagus nerve. There's a whole nervous system called the enteric nervous system that communicates between the gut, the microbiome, and the brain. It should be called the gut-brain microbiome axis. So, and all these things are going up, and they can cross the blood-brain barrier. Right. So what's happened is, because of what we've done to the food supply, it's nutrient poor. So if you leave the toxicants out of it and you just look at the nutrients, you need certain nutrients to run the brain, like
Yeah.
which, like zinc and magnesium. We
Yeah.
know what we keep referring to as glyphosate is a metal chelator. You heard Zen talk about it. Stephanie, it can go ad nauseum. So it chelates up all these metals. So the kids are nutrient deficient. You need metals like magnesium, you need them for 300 reactions in your body, zinc about 250. So without those nutrients, their brains don't work. So you say, what about the sugar addiction? So they can't run their brains, they can't focus, they cannot firepower their brain. They have a nutrient deficiency.
Yeah.
Now, what about those cravings where the kids are throwing tantrums in the grocery store at the checkout line because that's all the sugar is? How smart is that? They have the candy right there because they need quick energy. The kids can't run their mitochondria either, by the way. And so you need a quick fix. What are they craving? Carbs. Sugar's easy, whether it's glucose or fructose or carbs. You need a quick hit to give them energy. What we know happens in 20 minutes, 30 minutes later, they crash, because it's just a quick sugar hit. There's no nutrition in sugar. It's just, it does provide energy, but it's short-lived. And it's a quick solution. So they feel better for a minute, you get that sugar high, and then they crash.
Right.
So that's part of it in terms of the behavior. But parents have to be persistent. Don't take them through the supermarket. Don't give in when they're throwing the tantrum. You have to say no. Hug them tight, walk them out. If you have to leave the shopping cart at the checkout line, which I've done, grab my son and pull them out. I'll be back. Thank you. Sorry. Put it on the side, go out. But you say, what do? You say, use the blender. You have to, children do like cold. And sometimes when kids have all these, I'm going to give a solution. A lot of times these leaky guts, their tummies hurt. They're bloated, they're constipated, they're leaky. If sometimes cold salud is better tolerated than hot liquids, you give them a frozen smoothie drink with pineapple, bromelain, breaks down enzymes, can break down a bunch of stuff, coconut milk, and easily digestible fat, medium chain triglycerides, and start sneaking the greens in there. And if you have to put it in a colored cup so they don't see the color green, some kids don't even want to see the color green, you use a colored cup with a sippy cup or whatever you have to
I
do.
like, yeah,
And you start shifting them, and you have to restore their nutrients and get them off those processed foods, those emulsifiers in the processed foods. Some kids are allergic, xanthan gums, carrageenan. I know Suzanne has a great story about that and her son, but they also kill off the microbiome. I just wrote a paper on it. So you have to cook. Sorry, folks, if you have
Yeah.
children that are struggling, someone's got to get in the kitchen. And I didn't say mom, I said someone.
Yeah. And I would just add, don't buy it. Parents say to me, oh, but my kids only eat chicken
French fries,
nuggets
French
and yeah,
fries.
French fries and ice cream. That's all that they will eat. And my response is, who's in charge?
yeah,
Who's
Yeah.
in charge? You're the parent. You're in charge. You know what's better for them than they do. That's just a fact. Their brain is not as big as yours. They don't have the experience. You love them as much as you can, but you're in charge, and they will not starve themselves. They will eventually
They will
eat
eat.
what you offer them. And so you buy what is good for them, period. You purge everything. I am a cold turkey kind of person, because if it's in the house, the willpower from certain people
Yeah.
will not prevail. If it's there, they will eat it. So I purge all of it out of the house in one fell swoop, give it to the neighbors or put it in the trash, whatever it is, just chalk it up to, I don't know, landfill, right? And just go out and replace it with the brands that are sugar-free, organic, healthy as much as possible, and do that and make that decision. What I did with my son was when my eldest son, when he had allergies, as Michelle mentioned, the carrageenan thing, he had all kinds of allergies, just dozens of them, especially to nuts. But we didn't know at one point what was going on. And he had a red rash around his mouth. I think a lot of parents watching right now will be able to relate to this. It was almost like he sucked on a vacuum cleaner. And there were times when his lips would get swollen and red and flaky and bleed. And he would have to go to school like that with this red line around his mouth. And he was sitting at the kitchen table one day. This is my oldest. He was 9 years old. And he said, Mom, I wish all my allergies would go away. And I said, me too, buddy. But in my head, I was thinking that's never going to happen, because the doctors told me his allergies were only going to get worse. And then I heard what I was saying in my head, and I realized that was disempowering. And I'm not committed to that. I'm not committed to seeing my son or myself as victims of what's going on in the world. No, I'm committed to empowering, to being courageous and being creative and being a contribution in the world. That's personally what I'm committed to. And so I said, if I take that in this relationship with my son, we could cause something. We could create something, right? We would do something different. So I remembered my cousin Sarah, who had gone gluten-free for a year. And then she was able to then eat a piece of pizza at a birthday party or a piece of cake now and then. But she wouldn't have a major reaction because she had reset. I didn't know it, but at the time, later on I learned she had reset her microbiome. She had supported her gut and healing. And so I said to my son, would you like to, like Sarah, someday be able to eat a slice of pizza at a birthday party? He said, yes. And I said, then would you be my partner in your health? Would you
Nice.
drink green drinks and have healthy smoothie and try acupuncture and reduce the sugar, all that stuff? And he thought about it seriously. And then he said, yes. And I said, shook his hand. And I said, then buddy, you've got a deal. I promise you will get better. Now, I didn't know how that was going to happen, but I knew if I made a promise, I would take actions that I normally would never take. When you put your word on the line, you step up. So my suggestion, and we did, within 4 months, GMO-free diet, he got dramatically better. Within a year of eating organic diet, his allergies went from a 19 down to a 0.2. He no longer has life-threatening allergies. He can eat cashews by accident and not have to go to the hospital. It is life-altering to know that your son will not die from food. I mean, the amount of stress that relieves is tremendous. It's total peace of mind. It's priceless. So I would urge parents to make a deal with your children. Make a deal with them. Make a promise to them. Put your word on the line. It's your mindset that alters everything. It really is. If you say, I am going to do, and I remember thinking in my head, I don't care if I have to eat birdseed with my son. We're going to do this. Like that mindset, it's very different. That's not like an 80-20 mindset. That is all in. So that's what I really feel that's what parents need to do in order to make a change they need to go all in.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that, because I agree with that. That's my school of Ought to.
Should I add, and just in the sake of parents who are so busy, I just want to say there's a cost of convenience. Everybody wants a drive-through. Everybody's busy. Two parents are working. If there are two parents or one parent, whatever, I understand the drive-through mentality, especially this is what we've created, this dependence and lack of resilience and lack of self-empowerment. Everybody wants to be able to go through and come home with their taco or whatever the nonsense is in a bag. And that doesn't work. So it's a cultural shift. And poor parents are left literally holding the bag, metaphor intended, because they have to shift out of this convenience model, which doesn't exist in other countries. In France, the kids eat a cooked lunch at every meal. So this is a mindset change in terms of behavior, which you had referred to before, Mike. Our parents have to change the mindset and not hide the junk food like my husband did in the closet where the kids found it. That won't work.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No.
honey, I threw my husband under the bus.
That's common, one spouse on board, the other not. Maybe we should address that, but it's very common. I don't want to run out of time here. Why don't you guys, I guess, recap? Is that the right? Tell us what's going on that you're excited about. Like, how do you see these changes happening? How do we get and keep these kids healthier? Obviously, sugar, and I'm really fascinated, Stephanie. I'm going to dig down a little more on the connection of the clearing, if you will, of the fructose by or having it be blunted by the glyphosate. So glyphosate, I'll get that one day. But anyway, who wants to go first? But just wrap up so
Go
we
ahead,
don't.
Stephanie.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I just like to tell people what my formula for being healthy, which I just say, this is what I do. And I would encourage you to think about some of these things. And of course, it's the organic food, whole foods, cooked at home, none of this processed foods. Never buy a soy protein bar again. I think these foods are really toxic. And then I'm a big fan of sunlight. Get out in the sunlight without sunscreen and without sunglasses. Get out in the sunlight because the sun is very healing. And I've written in my book about how the sun can help your body to make cholesterol sulfate in the skin, as well as, of course, vitamin D. And vitamin D is a very essential factor for staying safe from COVID-19. So there's no reason why you should not beef up your vitamin D, but as well, your cholesterol sulfate in the skin, which is going to help keep your heart healthy as well as your brain. And then, of course, sulfur-containing foods. So I talk a lot about sulfur in my book, and I believe that we have a systemic sulfur deficiency problem in our country. And part of it is because glyphosate prevents sulfur uptake by the plants. That's been shown experimentally, but also because glyphosate disrupts many of the enzymes that are involved in sulfur metabolism. And so in particular, sulfate becomes deficient systemically. And I believe sulfate deficiency in the brain is a key factor, maybe the most important factor in autism. Again, I talk about all of this in my book. So eating sulfur-containing foods, what does that mean? Garlic, onions, cruciferous vegetables. On the animal-based side, you've got fish and seafood, organic eggs, grass-fed beef. Many of the base foods have essential sulfur-containing amino acids, more than the plants do. So when you eat more animal-based foods, you're getting better sources of high-quality sulfur in things like cysteine and methionine and taurine. Taurine is a sulfur-containing amino acid that only exists in animal-based foods. All of those nutrients are important for your health.
Super cool. Thank you. Who's next?
I'd like to mention, in my book, I talk about also adding in fermented foods like sauerkraut, kombucha, and apple cider vinegar. They do have a bacteria in them called Acetobacter that actually Stephanie shared a study from Africa to a doctor in South Korea. When I was there, I learned about it from him. So it was like really all around the world sort of connections. And Acetobacter has been shown to break apart glyphosate into non-toxic components in the soil. Yeah,
Okay.
so we don't know that it does that in the gut, but I'm gonna venture that what happens in the soil happens in the gut, and I'm just giving it to my kids, and I give them gold stars. I went out and bought a bunch of gold stars and had a little chart, and every day that they had sauerkraut or kombucha or kefir or fermented vegetables, they got a gold star. And after about 3 weeks of that, we didn't really need to do that anymore, and they voluntarily incorporate that into their diet now, because the most important thing, I think, is to have parents know to teach their kids, create a space of awareness so that the child knows how they feel after they eat certain foods, to notice when they feel, oh my gosh, that, that like when my son had school lunches, I have to point out, moms across America, we have School lunch testing that we did showed 95% of the school lunches were positive for glyphosate, 74% positive for other pesticides, 100% positive for heavy metals. There's 26 grams of sugar in the milk. It's just ridiculous. The school lunches are insane. When my son was eating school lunches, that one middle one with the autism symptoms, he noticed, and I noticed first, but then eventually after 3 or 4 times, he noticed that when Fridays, when he had his treat of a school lunch, he would get in fights with his brother, hit him or fight with him, and he would lose his privileges for Saturday morning cartoons. And after 3 or 4 weeks of that, he chose to stop eating the school lunches because he noticed his own behavior and he noticed the consequences.
Yes.
So I would encourage parents to really check in with your kids. Do you notice you feel a little crabby after eating that ice cream or after eating those sweets? Let's just check in about that. Do you want to maybe mark it down or just be in communication with them, how they feel and what the consequences are? And then they will start to make choices for themselves that are responsible
Very cool. Thank
and
you.
healthy.
And I love that almost adult dialogue with how do you feel after you eat? That's perfect. Michelle, bring us home.
I'm gonna bat one home. Hopefully we'll do for the home run here with you, Sugar Free Man, the new MDs. Here we are. This is my pitch.
Remind me to, oh, you're going to tell us about the new MDs?
I'll say it now. Before we have the new MDs,
Yeah.
we'll be doing, this will be episode 8. We're going to co-share, I believe, with you, Mike.
Okay.
Sugar Free Man and new MDs. And we are committed to education regarding all these topics we're talking about. And we are on Spotify. We're on rhi.bio. We are sponsored by gmoscience.org. That's my organization. We're on Facebook. And we run every month, usually the second Tuesday of the month. And we do it live when we can get our technology straight. So that's the new MDs, and we're just bringing conversations and people can ask questions. We're live. So
Yeah.
people type in, we will do our best to answer. So
Beautiful.
what do I tell folks? So I wrote that book, What's Making Our Children Sick. I'm working on book 2, Making Our Children Well. And what I'm focusing on is teaching parents not just eating well, but also homeopathy at home. That's my talk, homeopathy at home. So parents have tools to treat their kids at home. But prevention is always better than treatment, might I add. So what do I tell people? I said, you have to do a cleanup, a spring cleaning of the internal milieu and the external milieu. So with your kids, of course, you heard about organic diets a million times, filtered water. Occasionally we need air filters. If you live in a moldy home, hopefully not a HEPA filter. So we're doing the internal, the external cleaning up and decreasing the child's toxic load via your personal care products, your house cleaning products, leaving shoes at the door, emotional toxins. Please fix your relationships, parents. That also affects children, emotional toxicity. And let us lighten the load of our children between their food, their air, their water. Get them off their devices, please. And know what your kids are looking at. And think twice before we do experimental therapies. The new MDs did talk about experimental therapies and mRNA and meat. We just covered that one. That was episode 7. And so this is what parents, because the regulators have taken a back seat and there is the foxes guarding the hen house, parents really need to step up.
Okay.
And they need to be mindful of what their children are doing, home, school, and on their devices. Every kid now is on their phone. I see 18-month-olds with text neck doing this.
Yep.
They have calluses on their thumbs from texting so much. So I'm saying this is what parents' job now in 2023 is harder, because kids are even more savvy than their parents on their devices. And there's a lot of messaging and programming coming through their devices. So our poor parents, but we're here to support parents. And the first place is with their food. Be clear and what they're eating. It all matters, as you've heard from Stephanie Zen, from you, Mike. It all matters. Sugar-free summit, right on. But it has to begin at home in the kitchen, and get everyone in the kitchen, chopping, cutting, prepping, farmers markets, whatever it takes. Buy in bulk, and don't acquiesce. And perfection, never. It's a journey. We all make mistakes in the kitchen. We all occasionally fall off the wagon, and that's okay. We get back on and we do better the next time. And this is where I say you have to learn how to do it. A lot of young people don't know how to cook, don't know how to shop. And there's a lot of information on YouTube, free information. My own daughter said, Mom, when I asked her how to do sauerkraut, she said, watch it on YouTube. Did, and she was right. Thank you to my daughter. So I think I'll wrap up there with my final words to your listeners, Mike.
Well, this has really been a joy. And you guys we're similarly aligned in the holistic nature and the organic nature of getting people and kids healthy. So thank you so much. I wish we had more time. Happy to jump on your thing one day if you guys want me. And this has been just wonderful. Sadly, they have me booked back to back, and you guys got to go. Cook something going on with all of you. So we will talk real soon. Dan will be in touch with all of you, I'm sure, or whatever. But let me stop this recording. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed today's feature presentation. If you found it valuable and would like to access lifetime access to the recording, I recommend grabbing yourself an all-access pass today. With an all-access pass, you'll receive instant access to this featured talk, plus all the video and audio recordings of the 40-plus presentations throughout this year's summit. This gives you an ability to watch and listen wherever you are, whenever you want. Plus, it comes with thousands of dollars worth of free bonuses from all of our guest speakers that you'll find super valuable when it comes to freeing your children from the devastating effects of sugar. So with that being said, grab your all-access pass while you can and enjoy your next speaker presentation.